You're listening to Why We Do What We Do. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do Mini. I'm your host, Abraham.
And I'm your host, Shane.
And today we are talking about ways that you can make the world a slightly better place. And I'm going to start with the question, do you love traffic jams, Shane?
No, I don't. Not my favorite.
Do you wish you could be stuck in traffic for longer stretches of time?
Well, I recently had a birthday, and that is not what I wished for when I blew out my candles.
Okay. Well, if you do wish for those things, if you love traffic jams, if you wish you could be stuck in traffic for longer, just keep doing what you're doing because you're doing great.
Yeah. Just keep it up. You know, here's a crazy thing, though. Americans have lost 99 hours in congested traffic just in 2019 alone. So with the pandemic, that number dropped to 26 in 2020. But in 2022, drivers lost about 55 hours to congestion, which is about an hour per week that they're losing time in traffic jams.
Yeah, I read something that Americans will spend about 250 hours per year commuting. Now, this isn't necessarily due to congestion, but just that much time commuting. But this comes out to about 10 days. And so over the course of one's entire career, it comes out to about a year of time. A year. If you can imagine wild. Spending a year sitting in like a commuting type environment on a train or on a bus or in a car, whatever it is, like that is just so much time that is lost. It's like shaving off a year of your life, basically, giving it to the gods of transportation.
Yeah.
Now, other thing to consider here is that the population is expected to grow by more than 6 million people by 2025. So a lot more drivers are going to be joining the road relatively soon. Some are leaving the road, of course, but there's going to be a lot joining the road in a very high volume.
I think more joining than leaving at this point in time, which is a whole different
Probably.
issue. Now, in addition to the time lost, traffic congestion is actually a large contributor to carbon emissions, which is in itself a different problem, which will eventually kill us all.
Yes. So with all of that, I think we can do better.
Yes, we absolutely can. So in this topic today, we are covering traffic jams, or more scientifically, traffic congestion. When transportation is slower, trip times take longer, and there is more vehicular queuing than would be expected with free-flowing conditions in which vehicles move at posted speeds.
Now, for our friends in the UK, our people across the pond, as they say, they frequently use queuing to describe just lines of traffic and waiting in lines. So just in case you weren't as familiar with that term, that's what we're talking about here. Now, traffic congestion is due to a lot of factors. 75% of congestion is due to bottlenecks, traffic incidents, and work zones. So about 3/4 of traffic congestion is due to just those things: bottlenecks, traffic incidents like accidents, and those construction zones that are just prolific and all over the place.
Yep.
The majority of that 75% is bottlenecks. That actually makes up most of like the 3/4 of traffic due to those factors. Most of that is just bottlenecks.
Yeah. Something that seems like it's maybe a man-made problem that becomes a man-made thing to fix. So let's go ahead and dive into this. There are two avenues where we can start intervention. We change the road conditions and we change driving behavior. Okay, so change the environment. Ultimately, that'll change behavior. Life is good. Now, most of the solutions that were proposed by the Federal Highway Administration are strategies to change road infrastructure specifically. So this is probably because people don't want to hear they can be responsible for changing their own behavior to fix their problems, although they also don't want the government to spend time or money fixing it. So, there's got to be some solution somewhere.
Yeah. It's a damned if you do, damned if you don't type of orientation to this.
Exactly.
Anyway, strategies include some fairly obvious changes. It does depend on where the changes might occur. So, for example, whether you're worried about highway congestion or surface street congestion, there's different solutions depending on where the traffic is taking place. But for the highway, one of the major things they always talk about is increasing capacity for all transit systems in those spaces to help reduce congestion. Specifically, increasing capacity for highway traffic, for train commuting, and for other public transit such as buses.
Right. And another thing they'll do is they'll try to remove bottlenecks, where they create strategic bottlenecks in some places and they increase capacity at bottleneck areas. So if you're ever in Florida and you're driving down I-95, then there's a bottleneck right around Altamont Springs for some reason, right around the I-4 eyesore, and nobody can explain it and nobody knows why. And they did all this construction to improve the roads there, but people still stare at that thing, and I don't understand it.
Another strategy is to try and move as much freight as possible off of highways and onto railways instead. So if you can increase the capacity and the utility of using railway freight rather than commercial truck freight in cities, that will also help remove some of the major contribution to congestion that occurs in those highway and even surface street places.
Absolutely. And now another thing too is they could just operate systems more efficiently. So they could look at things like metering onto freeways or optimizing traffic signals. So basically just monitoring who's coming on and off, controlling for that a little bit so they can kind of control the flow of traffic, and then also making sure those traffic signals make sense. Because again, if you're ever on a highway in Florida, then you realize all the exits are all bonkers and there's too many signs and nobody can make sense of them. And that's why I-4 is the decapitation capital of the world.
I mean, and this is the thing that's always confused me too, is because we have AI now that can write like full on text, it can generate art. We've got games on our phones where we interact with NPC characters, which I guess is a tautology. We act with NPC people in a game that like can hold full like dialogue conversations with you, and
Sure.
we can't seem to figure out how to get basic light transitions to work more efficiently.
Yeah.
I feel like there is a huge disconnect between the available technology and the archaic technology used in light systems.
Yeah, it's weird.
Anyway, that's just one of those. Another one that's this operating systems more efficiently is simply to inform drivers of the conditions of the road so they can plan accordingly. Inform them where there's a lot of congestion or where there's a lot of construction or where like road conditions are bad due to weather and that sort of thing. So whatever it is, just having them be more and well informed can be helpful. And another strategy here is to try to redirect traffic to less congested areas. So if you have a high amount of congestion, try and like put up those sort of dynamic billboards that are like, here's the travel time, consider this alternate route instead, because the more you can spread out that traffic, the less the congestion will be in any one given area, meaning that the overall flow of traffic can be improved. And then finally, as we said, one of the other things that leads to congested traffic is the sort of freight, the shipping of goods and that sort of thing. And so improved freight management, and particularly with respect to delays at border crossing, can really help facilitate traffic rather than leading to congestion by having systems set up to really help get freight from one place to the other by whatever means makes the most sense to maintain the integrity of that system and get it through that system as efficiently as possible.
Absolutely. Now, that's for highways. Now, for surface roads, there's a couple things that we could do to improve this. One would be remove street parking. We all know street parking is a pain because people don't know how to park. So people park all kinds of crazy ways. And what ends up happening is they park in the road and they can't park in the road. And then it congests, it stuffs up the roads. It's just not great.
Yeah.
They could also increase the number of one-way streets. One-way streets are actually pretty helpful for improving traffic flows because you don't have to like drive around. It's a whole thing. It actually works really well.
Yeah, I've actually heard of some research suggesting that if you were basically eliminate the ability to take left turns, so you always took right turns, which might mean that you have to like circle the block to get where you're going, that even though you add a little bit more distance, you actually improve the overall efficiency of traffic travel because you don't have, because traffic is only ever going one of two directions, basically.
Right.
It's either going whatever direction it's going or it's turning right. And there's eliminating other traffic directions can reduce congestion as well. And this actually then has to do with the idea of restrict turns at key intersections. Basically, where there's a place where there's an enormous amount of traffic going through, you don't have a lot of option for making a lot of turns in those places. Again, you might do like some amount of turn lanes available, but it might be restricted. And that, again, can help improve the flow of traffic. And then another one is, I've actually been in a place where this was used, is movable barriers to adjust the flow during peak traffic times.
Yeah.
So basically, whatever it is, you might have a 5-lane road, and 3 of those lanes head west at one part of the day when there's more traffic during that part, and then 3 of those head east the other part of, they switch it. So the middle lane basically becomes a transition lane, and they'll move the barrier so that, or they'll set up lights to indicate whether or not that traffic lane is heading east or west, depending on the time of day, because that's where traffic flow is the heaviest. And I've been in places where that was the case.
I saw that too. It was in Hawaii. I saw that.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, like on some of the islands, there are essentially 3 lanes.
Yeah.
There's one traveling one way, one traveling the opposite direction, and the middle lane would shift and change depending on whether people were traveling to or from a major city to go to work.
Yeah.
And it was actually super cool. Like, it was super cool to see, but it was different because you're not used to it. So,
Right.
Now, another one is that for the street level part of this, we can anticipate en route traffic during popular events, things like parades, marathons. Maybe there's some kind of like something happening downtown where, some kind of assembly is being held. We could do that, or we could promote non-motorized travel by having comprehensive systems of bike lanes and sidewalks, which if you've ever spent any time in a major city, that's not always the case. Yeah. Those things don't always exist in a really comprehensive way.
Yeah, it's wild too. Sometimes they'll just end spontaneously and then pick up again several blocks later or something. So yeah, it can be difficult to get around, and promoting that can help. Another one that's relatively recent, but is providing more flexible work hours so that you, again, offset peak travel time. So people will be on the road at different times rather than all at the same time. And that can help ease the burden of traffic during specific times of day. And then, of course, there's incentivized rideshare and carpool, such as those HOV or high occupancy vehicle lanes. Mm-hmm. Very common. There's a lot of those in California, but I've seen them in other cities or places where there's just a lot of traffic happening. And then also offering potentially, so there's sort of carrot and stick options here, I think, mostly stick or just like ergonomic interventions. But the sort of stick one here is congestion pricing, meaning essentially you pay tolls during high traffic times and not during low traffic times, again, to try and have people choose to take alternate routes or not travel at times when it's really high congestion. So it's basically trying to incentivize, do something other than be here right now.
Yeah, for sure. That makes perfect sense too. So while all of that is fun, and that sounds like really great stuff, a lot of that is really just kind of setting up or arranging an environment so that this behavior can improve, right? You're setting up systems and setting up kind of procedures that influence behavior in some way. But there are some things that you can do that I think are going to be really helpful. First, there are some things that won't be able to change without behavior. Specifically, when there are more people operating vehicles that the capacity of the area is designated to facilitate or kind of have, there can be traffic congestion no matter how well you drive or navigate traffic. Bottlenecks and gridlock can happen from overwhelming numbers alone. So just the numbers itself, it can cause a problem.
But we can drastically increase the threshold of how many cars it takes to create congestion if we change our behavior. And if you're stuck in traffic right now, then fume at that while listening to some ads. All right, so now that we made your commute a little bit worse by making you listen to ads, let's talk about how congestion works and more how you can change your behavior or what behaviors are currently contributing to congestion. One is just slow reaction times. We are only capable of reacting at a certain speed. That means that we are going to behave in a way that means, like if you look at a light and you see always the first car goes and then the next car starts to go, and there's this sort of like pulling a chain effect, right? Rather than if everything moved at the same time, a lot more cars would get through the intersection all at once, but it'd be kind of dangerous because you need space between you and the next car.
Right.
All that is to say that reaction time. Another important thing that causes a lot of congestion is cutting people off and sudden lane changes. If you're doing those things, you are causing congestion.
Yeah.
Straight up.
There's actually a really cool video of that. Like I've seen that happen where like they show like the traffic from miles back and they show like how like one person cutting it off can like cause a traffic jam miles away.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And what happens is, and we'll talk about this in a second more, is the people you cut off then slow down, the people behind them slow down, and it creates this sort of congested area. So, and the related to that is the idea of racing ahead to merge instead of doing zippering. Again, zippering means that basically people take turns merging into a lane. Zippering helps lower congestion. If you are trying to squeeze in ahead and not zippering, then you are increasing congestion.
Yeah. And another issue that comes up is tailgating. And there's multiple reasons why. You'll find people that will tailgate closely to somebody. Somebody will brake check, they'll stop, and they'll do all kinds of things. And that becomes a problem. A lot of times when people are tailgating, they tend to ride their brake a little bit too.
Yeah.
Rubbernecking at an accident or something else. We see that all the time, and variable speeds. So when people are driving at various different speeds along the same pathway where there is a posted speed and people are driving 40 and people are driving 70 miles an hour, that creates a little bit of a kerfuffle, if you will.
And let's understand that kerfuffle. What happens is something they call a traffic bubble, or sometimes a traffic snake, or even they'll call it sometimes phantom traffic. And what you'll see is if you will look sort of a helicopter view of the road, is where that congestion exists, it moves backward along the flow of traffic. So it starts in one place, it'll move slowly backward down the route where traffic is, where that sort of congestion happens, and is not due to anything other than what the things we just mentioned, falling too closely, cutting people off, not merging, that sort of thing, creates that traffic blockage. And so when one car brakes or slows down, the car behind them must brake and slow down, and then the car behind them brakes and slows down, and it just keeps going backward. And even happening only once can create this sort of backward moving, what they call a phantom intersection. It's like people are having to stop as if cars were crossing in front of them, and all the cars slow down, even though there's nothing actually blocking traffic. At least not anymore. I mean, basically what happens, some person cuts someone off and that creates it.
Right.
And these can last for hours. That one simple act of following too closely or cutting someone off can lead to traffic congestion that lasts for hours. So if you're someone who's sitting in that, enjoying it, thriving in the being stuck on the freeway, and you're also someone who likes to cut people off, you have your problem and your solution.
Yeah, there you go. Now, I think about this a lot. It's very much so like the butterfly who beats its wings and causes a tornado, right? Like that whole, it's very much so the butterfly effect theory.
It is.
And that's really what happens, right? So you press your brakes and it causes a ruckus all the way down the line. And this happens again because people change lanes quickly, change lanes in front of cars, other cars, all of those cars then slow down, they have to react and all that stuff. So in short, if you create much more space between you and the car in front of you, then you can actually prevent traffic.
Exactly. Now, you can try and maintain an even distance between the car in front of you and the car behind you, as long as the car behind you isn't following too closely. But you generally want to just, if you can focus at least on creating a good amount of space between you and the car in front of you, that's going to help a lot with avoiding traffic. Does this mean that letting that jerk cut you off and getting away with it? Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Unless you want traffic jams and you're like going to do something about it. Those people suck. They're a huge part of the problem. But you do not have to join them and make the problem worse. So yes, it sucks when people get cut off. They're the ones causing this problem. But the solution is not to then cut them off or cut more people off. The solution is to keep giving space to the car in front of you. That will ultimately reduce congestion.
Yes, absolutely. Now, another thing that you can do, and this is something that you can change, is you can maintain an even speed, preferably right around or right above the speed limit, and you follow the flow of traffic to an extent. There's something called safe speeds, and you got to follow the safe speeds. If traffic is going too fast, then you got to make sure that you're keeping up with it. And this means adjusting your speed for weather too. The thing about this, and this I see this in Florida all the time, people will, when it starts raining, people will slow down and they'll turn their hazards on.
Yeah.
And they'll be driving like 30 miles an hour on a highway. And I understand, like, it's dangerous to drive in those weather conditions, period. But it gets worse when you're driving in the wrong lane and stuff like that. So driving too slow is very dangerous. I have to explain this to my daughter all the time. Like, driving too fast is dangerous, but driving too slow is also dangerous. It creates a hazard for people who are driving the speed limit.
Exactly. Yeah. People are not generally expecting a car to be nearly parked on a route where they're going a certain pace. So slowing down too much creates essentially a new obstacle that can result in accidents and congestion. So avoid in an area where you already have bad roads, so we don't need any more congestion there.
Right.
Another one here, driving defiantly too slow, slamming on your brakes, cutting people off, aggressively changing lanes, failing to zipper when merging. All of these behaviors are the reason we have more traffic than what would actually be accounted for by accidents, construction, and weather. Mm-hmm. And so we can try and reduce that just by simply changing our behavior a little bit.
Yeah, you've probably been driving in a traffic jam at some point in time and then come out of it and be like, what was that for?
Yeah, right? How frustrating.
Yeah, how frustrating is that? It's like some of us just want a reason or a cause, and you can't even get that. So that's a bummer.
Yeah.
Obviously, filtering traffic down to fewer lanes because of traffics or construction forces, those types of things force many cars to merge together, which forces the entire system to slow down in an effect that can stretch for miles or kilometers for our non-US friends. So we understand that construction and accidents are often causes for these types of things.
Right. And then furthermore, exit ramps that lead to busy intersections, because there's often lights there, traffic that's exiting off a freeway, even if it was doing the right thing, can back up all the way back onto the freeway. And then that extends dramatically backward, which can lead to more congestion and jams. And that's really out of everyone's control. That comes back to the needing more efficient systems for our lights.
Yes, absolutely. Now, there was a really cool study that aimed to tackle this, and this was out of the University of Nagoya in Japan. What they did was they put 20 drivers on a circular track and asked them to maintain a speed of 30 kilometers per hour or 18 miles an hour. And at first, it was pretty consistent. They were able to drive in a circle, and it wasn't too much of a problem. And then what they found was that one car would either speed up to the next car or slow down for some reason, and it created a section of track where you can see one car slows down, then the one behind them slows down, and behind them, and so on and so forth, through this backward moving congestion that rotated back along the track several times.
Right.
And the video is really interesting to see it happen. And it was caused by nothing other than human driving behavior.
Yep.
Like, it was 100% a driving behavior issue.
Exactly that. All right, so wrapping this all up, we get to the sort of "but why though" section of this. And I think the sort of major summary here is if you enjoy being stuck in hours-long commutes that should only take 15 minutes, then keep doing what you're doing. You're doing great.
Right.
Almost all of us, however, could actually be better at our driving behavior in a way that reduces the amount of traffic we must face every day.
Simple things like keeping your distance from the car in front of you and behind you, maintain a steady speed and avoid slowing down, and avoiding lane changes are all really great examples of how to keep the flow of traffic going.
In addition to that, zipper when merging, which means take turns merging into a lane, avoid those congested areas if you know that they're going to be congested. And when possible and when it makes sense, take public transit or walk or ride a bike. Like, those are great ways to get around.
Yeah.
Or don't and enjoy sitting in hours of unnecessary traffic.
Yeah.
I think that's what we got on how to stop traffic jams. You got anything else, Shane?
The thing about our show is that every episode is some way that you can save the world. So here's a really easy way to do that.
That's right. All right, perfect. Thanks for listening. This is Abraham.
This is Shane.
Why We Do What We Do Mini is out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.